Okay, that brings us to our panel of discussions, and we will run this as fast as possible. We'll try to get you out a little bit early today still, too. I can tell everyone's wearing down, but I do want to do the synthesis thing here of trying to bring it back home to help transform the organization into a better decision-making body. So Lori and Eric and Lisa. Eric and Lisa and I will sit up here, and Lori will be the moderator of the panel. So Lori Weber is this, she works in the Office of Information Management Analysis, Senior Environmental Scientist. She is in charge of the SWAMP program, and I've asked her to channel Charlie Rose today, so good luck.
I feel like him right now. Can you guys all hear me okay? Okay, great. So as Greg says, hi everybody, I'm Lori Weber. I'm the SWAMP coordinator at the State Water Board. And I want to thank you guys all for hanging out to the bitter end for our last panel discussion. You might recall that Greg, the topic of the discussion, or the topic of this panel, is how to better integrate science, data, and program needs for more effective work. And Greg also this morning mentioned that this symposium is meant to serve two purposes. It's not only to kind of showcase what we're doing in SWAMP and other programs and the data that we're generating, but the other part of this is to figure out how we can, or start talking about how we can make better links between our data generator type programs such as SWAMP and our water board and other regulatory programs within the water board and also with other agencies. So this panel is kind of to get that conversation started.
I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce Eric and Lisa too. Oh, you're going to do it.
Yes, yes. And I also wanted to say one of the reasons that we're doing this is because nobody likes to work in a vacuum, and it's pretty frustrating if you put your time and energy and heart and soul into an effort and then realize that, hey, nobody's really looking at the data that you just generated. So we want to make as many links as possible. So then I'll, just a real quick introduction of the panelists. Eric Stein is principal scientist at the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project. I missed a C, sorry about that, or SQUIRP. All right, yeah. Graduate of UCLA. Greg Gerhardt, you all know, and I don't think he needs any more introduction. And then also Lisa McCann, who's the Watershed Planning and Protection Manager at the Central Coast Regional Water Board.
UCSB and UC Davis.
Yes.
Still no Santa Cruz or Merced.
Anybody in the audience from Santa Cruz or Merced? We had a Santa Cruz person, didn't we? All right.
Irvine, sorry.
I think we got all these. What about the state colleges, guys?
Humboldt.
Okay, so I know Humboldt. Yeah, everybody. Half the audience is from Humboldt. I know. Okay, so the three questions that we asked these guys, and they're going to respond to them individually, is first to give a brief overview of your role and perspective on the topic of better integration of data and programs. Also, based on what you heard today, what are some of the key opportunities you see for enhancing the use of data, SWAMP or otherwise, to direct and inform our work to protect, enhance, and restore the beneficial uses of California? And the third part of the question is, what specific data, technology tools, or disruptions come to mind to help us realize these opportunities? So each panel member will have about 10 minutes to answer the question and also respond to a question or two from the audience.
Right. So my role on here is I guess I was brought in as the outsider, but I'm not really an outsider, right? But as somebody who doesn't work for any of the state or regional boards and is coming in more in a technical support role. So I have 5 minutes, right? So I'm going to try to go through these quickly so we're not keeping you here. So the first question. So my perspective is, again, from somebody who does works on more of the technical side to help support a lot of these programs. But in sitting here listening to all the talks today, I think this is a great symposium. It still strikes me that the various SWAMP programs are still relatively siloed. We started to hear some discussions of cross-coordinations and interactions between the various parts of SWAMP, but my observation is we're still probably more siloed than we need to be or should be, and so I think we need to begin looking for those opportunities to continue to build those bridges across the various parts of SWAMP and look for creative ways to integrate data from the different programs to look at causal questions and more holistic types of assessments. I was struck by Greg's, at the beginning he asked, raise your hand if you're from the SWAMP family, and like a big chunk of the room raise their hand, and I was thinking to myself, so who from our end user community is here? And so my observation is that we're probably heavily weighted from the SWAMP family and less so from what I would call the target end users. The SWAMP program in my mind should be providing information and data. I sort of had this thing where I said, think SWAMP first, right? That should be where all the data and information is coming from, or a lot of it to drive a lot of the other programs that we all work with, both within the Water Board and other agencies. And so I think in the future it'd be nice to reach out, maybe try to draw more of those, what I would call end users or customers in, so that we can have those perspectives in terms of how people are going to be using the products that we work so hard to produce in order to help them do their jobs. In terms of the second question, in terms of key opportunities for enhancing data or otherwise, just a couple of thoughts. We've already heard a lot about platforms to let the data talk to each other better, so I'm not going to get into that. But I do think it would be nice to have a framework. At the end of the day, we're all trying to protect and restore beneficial uses. I think it would be nice to have a framework that allows us to more clearly communicate how all of the information products we produce relate to beneficial uses, right? And I think Jay actually talked probably the closest to this in some of his remarks, but again, everything that we produce, all these great graphics, how does that answer the question of our beneficial uses being protected or restored or maintained? And so creating a framework that allows the data to more easily fit into that interpretive kind of context, I think would be helpful for everybody, helpful for us and helpful for the end users. And I liked some of the discussions about starting to think about these things through a risk or maybe of a predictive framework. I would offer that we have enough data now that we can start to be thinking about predictive tools, and either whether they're statistically derived or mechanistically derived, I think we can start thinking about being forward-looking and less retrospective, right? And really getting out there a little bit on a limb and saying, if we do X, Y, and Z, what do we think the implications of those decisions are? I think that would be really powerful. And then on the last question about tools or disruptions, I sort of, again, share this vision that everybody has a SWAMP icon on their desktop that they click on and it sort of gives them that ready access. But I think it's more than that. I mean, the treadmill, using the treadmill analogy that came up, we're never going to get out in front of all the new, ideas and data. So the more that we can create tools that allow users to easily integrate data and kind of query it in different ways, and things like Tableau and some of these things that are coming out there, I think there are platforms that allow people to do that we can begin exploring through open data initiatives. And then the last thing I would say is, and we've talked about this again, is creating sort of more of a two-way street on the data. And I think Grant's presentation spoke to this, of a way for all of the local data that's produced, whether it be BMP data or IRWIMP data, or a lot of that data that's produced, how do we sort of get that assimilated back into our statewide systems in a very seamless, easy, painless way, so that, and make it more broadly available. So the data flow should be maybe more two-way than it is right now. So those are my perspectives.
Are there any questions for Eric?
Terry, I saw you looking at me. I'm sorry, one more time?
Talked about the framework. We need to have a sort of a framework for bringing this all in, but I don't have a vision for what that means.
Oh, on the beneficial uses?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the idea is, and let's just focus on the aquatic life beneficial uses for the moment, right, versus some of the more human-focused beneficial uses. But if at the end of the day we have a beneficial use that's warm water habitat that we're trying to protect, I'd like to see better connections that say, when we do bioassessment or we do SPOT or we do we produce these, the output of that, what does that tell us about the degree to which we're meeting that beneficial use? How do we make that translation and say, if bioassessment scores in combination with these other pieces of data are at these levels, it's an indication that this beneficial use, we're close to where we need to, where it's being achieved. Or if it's not, it gives us some insight as to maybe why it's not being achieved. And putting it in that context, which is really, I think, in my opinion, what drives everything we do, is trying to maintain and restore those beneficial uses. Just making those linkages more apparent, I guess. Andy?
you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was, there's a current effort to, and Rafi, I think, had a graphic in his presentation to map Category 1 sites, and does that achieve what that framework? So I think it actually starts to in a limited way. I mean, right now, the Category 1 mapping effort, the way my limited understanding of it is it's heavily reliant on the bioassessment data and making an assumption that if you reach certain bioassessment scores, we're going to assume that some of those beneficial uses are being obtained. And so I think that's probably a good starting point, but I think there's other elements that need to be brought in. And also there's a lot of other things that we do that relate to aquatic life beneficial use that are need to be considered in addition to bioassessment. So I would offer it's a starting point, and that's my opinion at least.
That we've seen and basically does that.
I would agree that is the closest I think we are to being able to pull all the pieces together.
Greg?
Okay, so I'm here as a proxy for State Board in general. So I do work as Deputy Director of Office of Information Management and Analysis. But State Board has a lot of activities that would be potential opportunities to use data in its decision making. And I see some of the staff in the room. I know that there's probably more online too, but there's projects that are like statewide policies or plan amendments, as we call them these days, statewide permitting actions, support for regional permitting actions and policy decisions. And so State Board has a lot of staff working on a lot of things that are potential opportunities. And so I'm here, even though I'm not in charge of any of those regulatory program aspects, I feel like I'm channeling that because I used to work on those programs and I'm part of the executive team at the State Board. So I just want to frame the rest of what I say with that in mind. The opportunities that I see are everywhere, really. So this goes to, I think I'm going to combine my responses to questions 2 and 3 together. The disruption potential on a project is going to relate to how well tuned we have data and information ready to go and intervene with a project that needs it. So for example, if there's hypothetically a effort to establish minimum flow standards for anadromous fish going on, but there's other data that might inform other ways to look at ecological flow endpoints that are going to be also of interest to the agency, not just that particular project. There might be a way to sort of synchronize both data opportunities that come up because we have projects that are revealing lots of interesting insights about what these other types of data could inform, but they also would be of interest potentially to that project. So really the opportunity for us to change, I think, has a lot to do with how well we can line up the data analysis. I've done a lot of thinking about this, probably too much for this answer right now, but I know that there's a certain amount of work that has to be done to do the data science, to do the analysis. You talked about data wrangling and how much work it is. It is a lot of work. And so there's a disincentive for a project manager here at a regulatory agency to sort of stop and pause everything and wait for that data wrangling to happen. So there's efforts in my mind underway that could both streamline the work that is needed to do the data wrangling and data science, and those are some of the projects that we've talked about, the Tableau piloting and the visualization and the open data platform, clean it all up, the data, put it in a regular recycle, refresh rate, and stick it on a platform with web services so that it doesn't take a lot of hand massaging of Excel files. So there's an effort that we can do to streamline the amount of work and reduce the amount of work that is needed to do the data analysis, but there's still the need to get the attention of the executives in charge of project management to say, hey, let's hit the pause button here for 5 minutes or 5 days or whatever the time is needed to bring the data into the conversation. And so that's really the trick that I see. I know it's kind of getting esoteric in my description, but that's really the trick that we need to do. And a good example of those disruptions that occur even unintentionally are some of the, like Frank Loge's presentation and the entry that they had, as well as the UC Davis and the Cloud Comply. These are creating conversations that we didn't expect. Now we have regulatory personnel going to meetings talking about the need to provide a dashboard that does something that they want. We've got people questioning policy decisions on water conservation because there's all this new information. It used to be speculative. It used to be very qualitative. Yes, of course there's going to be energy savings when you conserve water, but now that you have a quantification of it, now you have a number and a dollar amount, it's been a bit of a disruptor. And so those are not projects that I'm particularly involved in at this point, but I'm excited to see that the fact that there is the ability to sort of create that moment of pause. And then if you can convince an agency or a team that's working on a project to do the data science and to start introducing some of these insights into their own project, whether it's a numeric nutrient endpoint project, toxicology or toxicity policy, or constituents of emerging concern initiative that we're working on that touches many, many programs. We've got a climate initiative that has lots and lots of needs for data intervention, I'll just call it. So that's the way I see this system that we're working in. Is there's opportunities everywhere. It's just a matter of trying to line up the right thing of here's some people, here's some data, here's the timing is right. Let's get in there and change the conversation. So that's all.
Questions? I have one.
What the heck did I just say?
No, I got it. How do we line that up? Do you have any suggestions for how to make that line up, the data?
Well, so there's two thoughts. One is you do a structured approach where you start bringing data insights and data conversations to the existing places where conversations are already happening. So roundtable meetings, management meetings, bring data to board meetings. Like I wish our board members would ask for a data roll-up on every project that they get briefed on. If you had to go to them and just hand them something that was sort of a data summary of your issue, it would help frame the rest of the briefing conversation. Normally the briefings are very verbal and not much data involved in them. So there's little structural things like that. And then there's the other part, which is the just go with the flow. It's much harder to describe, but when you see that opportunity coming along, you jump on that wave and you try to intervene and insert some data conversation.
So Greg, I had a question. So, we have the seed and database. Is it set up for the sharing that you talked about before? What would it take to get there?
Yeah, the Seedon database has publicly available information in it. It's got download, search screens, and it has some coming web services and more web services in the future. What we've also done is we've sort of hard mashed over data sets from Seedon onto the open data platform. Those are fully open data. They meet the machine readable, the metadata, the data definitions on all the fields. They meet the definition of open data, but we had to sort of extract them manually and put them on that platform. And we're going to continue to do that over time. So there's this morph that's happening, or this paradigm shift that's happening, where databases 5 years ago, to get their data out, they had to have search screens, reports. They had to have a lot of programming and coding put into the end of every one of those databases to sort of have an effluent of data. And now what we've got is an open data paradigm where we can much easier move it to a new platform and change that up a little bit. We don't have to add all the visualization and reporting services to databases. And Seedon fits right into that paradigm shift where it's still going down the road of creating reports and web services on the end of Seedon, but we've also got the ability to move data into the open data platform.
And a follow-up, since you're head of OEMA, what will it take to get these these tools like Tableau and Shiny apps into the hands of regional and state board folks?
It's surprisingly easy in some ways. We're doing it now. Before we surveyed the regions asking who wanted to participate in our pilot on R, which is Shiny, Tableau, and JMP, which is out in the lobby. Before we did that, there were people using it anyway. So it's a procurement process. You needed a justification, somebody to sign off on it, somebody to order it. It's cloud-based. It's software as a service. Didn't require any programming. Therefore, it's not an IT project that has to go through stage gate analysis. So that there's more people than we thought doing this already. And we're hoping with our daylighting of this piloting of the Data Science Club and hopefully linking it to the GIS roundtable. Those of you who know GIS, you know that that's where the data scientists are in our organizations. They're doing that. So once we formalize it a little bit more, it'll just get in the hands of people. I don't think every staff will have a visualization software application on their desktop, but they'll have access to it if they want it. The harder part, if you ask me, is creating the permission for the staff to spend a week playing around, doing the wrangling. You know, it's risk for a manager. I don't know what I'm going to get out of it. Let Greg play for a week.
Yes, well, I work for the Central Coast Water Board, and I guess I'm kind of spoiled because we do a lot of data integration, data wrangling, and decision-making based on that. And there's some data wranglers and data integrators over there. You already heard Karen's presentation. And I do kind of represent the end user in that I'm a program, I oversee multiple programs, and also I'm a policy advisor to our board. So I get to take the great work and the data science that they do and then try to make sense out of it and bring it back into our program. So maybe there's work to do at other regions and the state as well at our region, but that's my perspective. We do it all the time, every day. Let's see. I wanted to kind of interject this other. We had a question at Karen's talk that relates to what my comments were going to be anyway. So I'm going to read you this person's question and then the answers that I jotted down, which relates to this first question anyway. This person wanted to know how has the report card been used in regional board decision making? And here's just a couple of answers that came to mind. We've adjusted what we monitor in our ambient monitoring program in some of the locations at times when we can see data gaps or areas of that we want to protect more or areas that we think are more impaired. We've prioritized certain parameters to include in various discharge permits, both for general orders and waivers as well as for individual facilities. We've prioritized where geographically we want to focus program implementation and enforcement activities by looking at the spatial display of where it's healthy and where it's not. And we've used it to conduct organization-wide strategic planning and prioritization. So we've successfully had board support for staff's focus on, for the way staff uses resources to focus on programs and priorities because we're able to display that information and show them where and what our issues are. Okay, what else?
Anybody have any questions for Lisa?
Oh,
You're still going? Oh, sorry.
have I spoken
thought you
too
were
long?
finished.
Should I stop? No, that was the first. That was the first question.
Oh, okay.
A couple other things about perspective and ways we use data is that we not only use it internally, but we also have successfully used it because of Karen to educate the public and our board members. We get lots of questions now that are highly informed about conditions in our watersheds and our water bodies because the information is so publicly accessible and so easy to understand. Can be challenging for us for them to know as much as they do, but that's okay. We welcome that. It also helps us be able to leverage because then other organizations will see where our data gaps are and will outreach to our data science folks, and then therefore we create lots of collaborations which improves our data as well as makes ours and the accessibility of ours and our decisions more accessible to others. Couple opportunities. I wanted to expand just quickly on what Eric said about beneficial uses. It would be really cool to have, for us all to know what all the indicators and thresholds are to, and have agreement about it statewide to interpret when beneficial uses are met or not. We've advanced a lot into some new areas, but we have a lot of work to do still in that regard. Skip the make data accessible in real time, but I echo that. Also, maybe this is picking up on what Greg said, but I think we need to promote, train, and recruit interdisciplinary and creative thinking people who naturally think about data integration all the time And we need to find people who love to data wrangle. Because that is when people ask me, how'd you guys get what you have at Region 3? That's my answer. We have data wranglers and people that have a lot of patience and enthusiasm for detail and tedious work, as well as enthusiastic, and can see how it will be used in our programs. And they're always beating us all on the head about that. And it's really effective. And so I think that that's, the evolution of our organization and the awareness of data use and the need for its expansion and more opportunities. We might be able to do a lot now just to make sure that we are working with and recruiting and assigning these projects to people that just naturally go there. And then tools or disruptions. I guess the only thing I'd like to add is that we're really interested in expanding our data use to be able to also integrate BMP effectiveness and program effectiveness at regional and state level with water quality data and conditions in watersheds and streams and other water bodies.
I'll take that as a signal that you're done.
I'm done.
Any questions? I misinterpreted your signal.
That's okay.
Question for Lisa?
Just wondering if you've experienced, because of the linking that you're doing with data and basically permits and things, whether you've gotten blowback from industry or just organizations in general who are finding that you've overreached or overstepped your bounds, and whether you see, I don't know, just thoughts on the importance of presenting a unified front when it comes to agencies who are trying to meet their missions, which are protecting the integrity of our environment.
I would say that data speaks for itself, and no one likes to be regulated, but we've been highly successful at just continuing to show the data early and often, and then it stands for itself, so that it has become quite compelling particularly in the irrigated agricultural runoff arena in Central Coast region. The toxicity is the toxicity from agricultural pesticides. The levels of nitrates are coming from fertilizer. It's all known. It's all been well documented and well displayed. So there's always comments about it, but we're done arguing about it. And depending on your perspective, a few years is not an unreasonable amount of time to lay out that information, update it, and continue to talk about it before it becomes on the ground in terms of implementation and in the permits. But
So this is sort of more to the regulators. How do we marry the sort of the framework that seems to be sort of holistic and tied to beneficial uses, and the 303D assessment, which seems to be based on, just a couple indicators here and there?
I don't understand the question.
Well, I mean, sometimes you have biological data that shows the watershed is in good shape, and then it shows up on the 303D list because there happened to be, a couple of bacterial exceedants. That type of stuff happens all the time. And sometimes I think we lose perspective chasing a list when we're not really looking perhaps at the sort of bigger picture.
Would EPA give us some relief on that listing part? That'd be my question.
Well,
This is not EPA policy.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking
No,
outside the box.
So my thought was we need to do some conceptual model mapping, and you've heard me go off on this, and Chris and I were talking about it earlier, but we went down that road a bit with an effort to map out the beneficial uses and how they relate to the way the rest of the world evaluates water quality conditions or assesses something. And the list, the 303D list or 305, whatever, is just one way to filter that some people use to look at and assess something. But the beneficial use part is really our heart and our soul of our agency. And we speak in beneficial uses. I don't want to make this sound like it's being judgmental, but we speak in beneficial uses and we know not what we say sometimes. And so, for example, like I don't know, I had to think about this. We don't have a fishing beneficial use. We have Rec 1 to swim. We okay, so it's not universal, but yeah, it doesn't cover the whole aspect of fishing. There's people that go out and fish that don't consume the fish. There's people that go recreate. So, and there's cold water beneficial uses that protect certain types of fish. And so my point is, we sometimes simplify what we think is the public's interest, but the complex world that we live on is actually much more complex than just fishing or swimming or what have you.
So I just wanted to say that I used to be the TMDL program manager at Region 3, and I kept bugging staff to list and do TMDLs to copy other states who have flow listings and biological impairment listings. And the TMDL program is back in my section, and I'm already bugging the new program manager about that as well. That's one way that I think we need to get at it. And I don't think, I disagree a little bit with what you said, Greg. I think a lot of it is data-driven. It's been really easy to go out and collect basic water quality, conventional water quality parameters for all these years, and the other parameters, indicators, ways of assessing habitat, fishing, and the other beneficial uses, it's more complex. But it's not new science, it's not newly available. We just haven't gone there as an agency, which is, well, I'll stop there. I was going to say something maybe not very diplomatic, but back to that comment about data interdisciplinary data integrators. We got to get the physical parameters and biological parameters up and equal to the chemical and physical water quality parameters that we already have a lot of data on.
Is that on? The predecessor software to the analytics we do with the Region 3 thing was code I wrote to create the 303D list. It scanned specifically for each beneficial use, looked at national standards, looked at John Marshak's water quality goals. So that explicit analysis is inherent in the work that we're doing. We aren't putting that 303D analysis on screen right now because we're working on watershed health. It's our view that just looking at impairment isn't enough. Let's go look at the good end too. So that, I hear there's a mapping project for Category 1 waters. I didn't know that was true. The scanning system we have identifies what we would consider A+ waters. As it goes and looks at all this data, it'll look at each of those reaches, and if there are enough good things about those reaches, or if it models out well using CFCI and other biologicals, then it's identified and mapped. So the notion that, we have the technology and are scanning things at a beneficial use level is the bottom line here.
I think part of the disconnect with beneficial use identification is that our water quality objectives aren't necessarily tied to beneficial uses. When we adopt a water quality objective, we aren't required to say this objective at this level protects this particular beneficial use, like the federal government does when EPA sets a water quality criterion and they say, okay, here's the number for aquatic life protection, here's the number for human health protection. We don't do that in California. So there is a disconnect inherently in our system that we have to somehow overcome.
That's an excellent point, because when we talked about mapping the beneficial uses, it was on the other end. It was really connecting it to the data that we're collecting. And I do agree that data-driven exercises are very informative to making decisions, but in terms of linking it back to what is the beneficial use that you're trying to protect, because ultimately that's what we have to speak in at a regulatory language here. And so you're talking about the flip side of the same coin. If there's an objective that's established that's protective of a use, your data can then better inform you on whether you're meeting that use or not. If you don't have that connection of an objective, you're just throwing data up and sort of it's subjective. It's how much turbidity is enough to cause enough problem to call it a sediment TMDL is needed at this point. So it gets very subjective once you take that out. And I agree with you. So.
We have time for a couple of Charlie Rose questions. All right, so based on what I heard you guys say I came up with 3 kind of somewhat cynical take-home points, and I just want to get your perspective on this. Do you agree or not? The first one is that it seems like managers are making decisions without considering data first. It seems like that's a problem and it happens regularly. The second one is that we appear to be creating a lot of really neat tools, but we don't necessarily think ahead of time, is there a need for that tool? And the third one is not cynical at all. It's that Region 3 has it all figured out. So do you have any response to those 3?
I'll start with the second question because that was actually one of the things on my list that I didn't get to just in the sake of time. Is I actually, on the second one, right, I also sort of feel like the end user should be defining the tool, right? And so I think often we define the tools because we feel like, okay, we know the data and we know the question, so let's define the tool. But really, it's backwards, right? I would offer that the end user, I would like to sit down with, for example, the MS4 coordinators and have them define the tool that they need to do their job, right? And then figure out, do we have the right data to support to answer that question, and how can we best make it available to them? And so I do think sometimes we have it a little bit backwards. And then I'm going to just add one other thing because I have the mic right now. And when Greg was talking about the disruptors, one thing that is a little bit, I think a missing piece that I would like to see us is the bond-funded programs, I would offer, are working against us from a monitoring perspective. Because the monitoring is poorly coordinated, poorly conceived, not, and so for the recipients, it's viewed as a tax, right? And I talk to these people all the time, right? It's a monitoring tax that a certain percentage of their budget has to go to monitoring that nobody expects is going to produce any useful information. And so that, in my opinion, is extremely damaging. And so I think that's an area where we should put more effort is how do we leverage the money that people are going to expend monitoring bond-funded projects under, say, Prop 1 and make good use of that. So.
My response is nope, nope, and yep.
So I'll just answer number 2 slightly differently. The cool tool out there is actually the staff. And so we've been focusing on the system, not on, or meaning the technology that's on someone's website that somebody else sort of pre-thought for them. And actually what we need to do is empower the staff to have the ability and give them permission to ask questions. There's a couple of great examples of performance management where we've got well-designed report cards that the metrics and the measure has been thought out to reflect exactly what it needs to try to measure and report back to the agency. Those efforts require people to get ahead of time, put the tool on the table and start to use the tool. In contrast, what we often get in our management meetings is questions that didn't consider, or that metric that wasn't designed to even address, or maybe it partially addresses, and so managers end up giving up because it's going to take somebody another day to go do the analysis. It's going to be a very custom combination of different data sets, and the work is going to be creative. And again, the tool in that case is staff. We need every person or every organization needs a data scientist or 3 sitting around them to help answer these questions when they come up, and then we need to train ourselves to sort of pause and wait for the answer.
So you're saying it's no black box, right? Build a technical capability among staff, and the tools are just the software that you would use to visualize the data and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's fascinating how much you can still do with Excel that's been around for 30 years or whatever.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to say something a little more serious and expand on, I don't remember which question it was, or the comment about management. Oh, yeah, management not using.
Is that a phenomenon? Or?
Yeah. So the water boards have been around since 1969, and we've only been collecting this much in this sophisticated type of data for 15, I don't know, maybe even 20, to be more generous with that. So if you've read anything about how long it takes to change a culture, at least as long as the culture's been in place, so in about 30, that'd be about 20 more years, 30 years, it'll be, managers will always be making decisions with data, and they'll probably be having symposiums like this and saying, gosh, why do we always make all of our decisions based on data? Why don't we just sometimes wing it? No. But yeah, I think we're already moving in that direction, and obviously the strategic planning sessions from many years ago told our management that we needed it, and it just takes a long time.
Well, you're kind of both saying the same thing with the data wranglers and the staff, data scientists. More questions? Yeah. I can't do a very good Charlie Rose imitation.
Did great.
Yeah.
Are we,
oh.
Good question.
Sorry. I think this is a perfect discussion because it's very much linked to, why do we have so many TMDLs that are still open? And, and I think it's because the implementation is not effective. There's not a lot of data being collected or, really showing that it's making any changes. And to have these direct discussions about data and making decisions based on data is at the heart of it all. So I hope that the next time there's a symposium that, we continue to, or we find other avenues to have discussions about actually using the data. Otherwise, it's really spinning your wheels. The first example that I came across was a few years ago, seeing that there was not enough data to assess one of the creeks in Lake County. It was, in some category on the 303D evaluation, said not enough data to assess it. And there was like four exceedances for E. coli, but you need 5. And it's like, wow, so irrigated ag took 4 samples for E. coli, but not 5. And so we couldn't list it. And yet, the tribes collect data on that. And if you guys were using tribal data, then it would have been enough, And it just, to me, it showed that there would seem to be no overarching organizational review and of the data. And so I think this is something that we just have to push to make it mean something so that we're not wasting our time or spinning our wheels and informing our decisions based on what's out there. And so our money is used more efficiently. Our time is used more efficiently. So I just want to thank you for your efforts on this and hope we all continue to be really focused about it. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll leave you with some data. I was going to try to gather it real quick, but it costs us about $1 million as staff time to write a TMDL at the state and regional water boards. That's an average. So it costs about $1 million of your fees or taxpayer dollars, however you want to think about it. We have 267 left to go, I think, or some over 100. I couldn't find the numbers real quick, but we have a lot of TMDLs that are on the books that we have to implement. We have a lot more to write. And it's a long road ahead, and those are based on that worst case scenario, the poor part of the report card, the Fs, the 303D listing, single sort of lens focus on a watershed. And so I think we just need to start getting smarter about how do we use data and information to solve these actual problems. So
I'm going to ask you a Charlie Rose question. So is there a schedule for those 267 or the ones that are in implementation? Where's the calendar that shows the projected timeline to get all of those across the finish line, and achieve the objectives of the TMDL so that you can delist the water bodies?
So the sad answer to that is that we're building a database that's going to track that. We are, and we've been building it for a couple of years because it takes a while to build databases. So, but it's literally that question came after we started implementing TMDLs of, well, what's going to implement them? It's the permits. Well, what's in the permit that's going to implement the TMDL? Well, I don't know yet, but let's build a database to track that. Well, what's the schedule to get them, coordinated on? Well, I don't, so there's a lot of conversations happening about that, but the timing was after we, unfortunately we didn't have a choice. We got sued and federal law requires that we did it, and we got sued, and so we had to start writing TMDLs. But the past is the past. Now we need to get smart about the future. And so.
We're out of time. I want to thank the panelists. Thank you very much, and thank you for your questions.
Thank you. Okay, so that's it. I'm going to adjourn. Thank you, everyone, for coming. If you have questions or feedback, don't hesitate to email me, walk up to me, call me, or tweet me. So I think that's a verb. So anyway, thanks for coming, everyone. Bye. We'll do it again next year.